Good evening, everyone. How are you? I hope you are all doing great and waiting for the result. So, classes by unit we have done. Now, as per the June 2025 and December 2025, we will have to change our strategy. So, I was thinking to bring the classes by solving the PYQs as much as we can, with them lots of concept clarity, each concept, each options writer given in the questions. So, solving 10 questions each day it will be helpful, I guess. So you all have to watch, stay tuned, subscribe the channel and share. And let's see the first question, which is from the June and October 2022 shift 1. Okay, so here the question number 51 we have, that is the question number 1. Obviously, the deductive method differs from the inductive method in drawing its conclusion from verification, particular instances, applications, and general truths. The deductive method differs from the inductive method. Deductive and inductive we have done in paper 1, general to specific and specific to general. So you have to identify how deductive method is different from the inductive one in drawing conclusion. So correct answer was option 4, general truth. Okay. So we all know that deductive reasoning moves from general to specific. General to specific deductive method, and inductive reasoning by contrast moves from particular to general laws. Okay, so deduction is closely associated with classical logic that we all know by Aristotle, and Aristotle's work prior analysis laid the foundation of deductive syllogistic logic. Remember this. Okay, so this is the difference between deductive and inductive. From general to specific draws the conclusion, and inductive moves from particular to general. So this is the difference. So you must remember that if the question related in the exam, you will find where you will find the axioms, universal laws, general premises. So you can think about the deductive. And if there is a question that mention observation or data, then you can go to the inductive method. Okay. Now let's see the question number 2. Paper 1 class we will focus. Which one of the following journals publishes articles related to critical theory exclusively? Salmagni, Diacritics, Kelalu, and Grand Street. Which one of the following journals publishes articles related to critical theory exclusively? So now I am following the pattern that I prepared and cracked, solving so many questions with concept clarity. Classes unit wise, you all know you have done in your MA. So now questions, practice different type of questions, different writers, major, minor, including, you must practice. Correct answer is option 2, Diacritics. So Diacritics is a highly influential academic journal devoted mainly to critical theory, literary theory, philosophy, and continental thought. Okay, remember it is related to critical theory, literary theory, philosophy, and continental thought. It was founded in 1971, published by John Hopkins University Press, and it is published in United States. So you must remember the theoretical focus by Diacritics is post-structuralism, deconstruction, psychoanalysis, Marxism, and feminism. You must remember the thinkers that are associated with this. We have Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, Roland Barthes. Okay, so Kelalu is African diaspora literature. Salmagri is a general literary and cultural criticism, and Grand Street is a literary magazine. It is not a theory exclusively. So it is Diacritics was the correct answer. Now let's see the next question. Next question we have, which one of the following assumptions best expresses the position of post-structuralist criticism? Which one of the following assumptions best expresses the position of post-structuralist criticism? From today class will be regular, and sorry for not taking class previously, but PYQs we have solved for December 2025, and this time I'm aiming to solve at least more than 5-year questions PYQs with the detailed concept clarity. At least if the writer is going to repeat, we will be familiar, and also we will be familiar about the lesser known writers that each time NTA brings. Correct answer. The options was definite structure underlying empirical events, language is representational, apprehension of reality is a construct, and knowledge operates according to procedures that are axiomatic. Okay, so correct answer is option 3, apprehension of reality is a construct. So in post-structuralism, as per which one of the following assumptions you have to find out that best expresses the position of a post-structuralist criticism. So post-structuralism, we all know it rejects fixed meaning, and it also is a rejection of the structuralism that this said that the meaning is fixed. You must know the sign and signifier, stable structures, and objective truth. So post-structuralism rejected what the structuralism critics has said. It argues that reality is mediated through language, discourse, and power relations. So remember the Jacques Derrida's concept deconstruction, difference, okay, and the mentioned in Grammatology 1967, Michel Foucault's 1926-1924 from France, major works he has given the order of the things and discipline and punish. These are the major works from post-structuralism. Remember, core ideas here they have mentioned in post-structuralism. Meaning is unstable, that is not fixed. Language does not transparently represent reality, and knowledge is historically and culturally constructed. It depends. So you must remember pointer fixed structure. It was the part of structuralism, and constructed reality, that is meaning is not fixed. Meaning is different, differed, deconstructed. So it is the part of post-structuralism. Okay. So this is how we are going to prepare and revise. Next question we have, which one of the following is correct about Sauzer's analysis of language? By practicing, we will get the idea and we will not going to leave the linguistic part, any linguist, any cultural theorist. Okay, so that's what I was thinking. La Lang is the system of language. Parole focuses on language as a system at a particular time, and La Lang is a particular instance of speech and writing. Parole is the study of language over a period of time. As per the Sauzer's analysis of language, diachronic, synchronic, remember Lang and Parole, sign and signifier. So correct answer is option 1. La Lang is the system of a language, okay, and parole is the speech by individual. So Ferdinand de Souza, remember they asked the Ferdinand date of birth also, so that is also important, and native country is also important for all the writers. So he belongs to Switzerland. He is known as the father of structural linguistic, and the very important work you must know, Course in General Linguistic 1966, 1916, sorry, it was posthumously published. La Lang, that means it is an abstract system, socially and collectively constructed, and parole is an individual speech act. Okay. Synchronic, diachronic. Synchronic is a language at a given time, and diachronic is a language through the history, how it changes the meaning of the specific language over period of time, and in the specific time the same word has a different meaning. So this is what a diachronic and synchronic. Next question we have, who among the following theorists particularly emphasized the social and historical dimensions of a text reception? Option you have Wolfgang Iser, Stanley Fish, Hans Robert Joss, and Pierre Bourdieu. I will try to add as much concept related to one particular writer, theorist as I can, and if any of you are aware, you can add in the comment section. So here you have to discuss and talk about that of these theorists who particularly emphasize the social and historical dimensions of a text reception. Here they are talking about the reception theory. So it is option 3, Hans Robert Joss. Okay, belongs to Germany, and also school he related with Constance School of Reception Theory. The major work Towards an Aesthetic of Reception 1970, remember the year also, and remember the very important concept, horizon of expectations. Here it means that readers interpret the text based on historical, social and cultural context. So you can here also compare Wolfgang Iser, Stanley Fish and Hans Robert Joss. Wolfgang Iser implied reader gaps in the text related with Stanley Fish related with interpretive communities, and Hans Robert Joss related to history plus society and reception theory. These are the important concepts related with all these theorists. Okay. Next question we have, which one of the following statement is true about Aristotle's Poetic? Aristotle's Poetics and Republic by Plato. We will do the separate class for that. He asserted that value of poetry by integrating rhetoric and imitation, that is mimesis. He also asserted that the value of poetry by focusing on both rhetoric and imitation. He asserted the value of poetry by giving preference to rhetoric over imitation. He asserted the value of poetry by focusing on imitation. So you have to find out that which one of the following statement is true about Aristotle's Poetics. So in Aristotle's Poetic is a very important work by Aristotle in which he has talked about mimesis and rhetoric. So which type of poetry he has given the value? So value of poetry by integrating rhetoric and imitation. Here are the options you can find out. Correct answer is option 4. He asserted the value of poetry by focusing on imitation, that is mimesis, rather than rhetoric. So rhetoric is declined here and he has emphasized on imitation. Imitation that Plato has rejected, and he told that a poet should be banished. And in contrast, Aristotle has defended that the poet is not only copying but they are trying to spread that is totally not worth to banish the poet from the legislature world. So it was not a conflict we can say, but he has given his opinion. So Aristotle, he was the student of Plato, remember, and the teacher of the Alexander the Great, one of the foundational figures of Western philosophy, literary theory, and criticism. Poetics, must remember, it is a treatise on literary criticism. The work, it is a surviving portion, mainly deals with tragedy and epic poetry, and it is also considered the earliest systematic work of literary theory. Okay. So here, argument that you will find here by Aristotle, specifically in Poetics, he established the value of poetry not through persuasion, that is rhetoric, but through imitation, that we know as mimesis. So for Aristotle, poetry is mimetic. It imitates human action, character, and life. And imitation is natural to human beings and a primary mode of learning. So that is why Aristotle defended the imitation of poet by telling Plato that it is not a bad thing. But here, if poet is imitating, that means they are learning. Okay. So poetry is philosophically superior to history because it deals with universal, not particulars. So here totally we can say Aristotle has it defended. So that is why you can say all the options were incorrect because Aristotle here clearly separates rhetoric and poetics. How we all know. Rhetoric aims at persuasion while poetics aims at representation. That we all know as imitation. Imitation is a not a bad thing, but by imitating, human learns. Let's see the next question. All the options is mentioned here. And also he has also talked about that imitating the emotional effects of tragedy we released by, that is known as pity and fear and catharsis, we have studied, arise from plot, character, and action that is not related with any rhetorical ornamentation. Now let's see the next question. Who said of the blank verse, quoting an unnamed critic, that it is verse only to the eye, adding further that it has neither the easiness of prose nor the melody of numbers? John Dryden, Alexander Pope, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, or Samuel Johnson? Who said of the blank verse, quoting an unnamed critic, that it is? So it is a quotation you have to find out stated by which of the writers given in the options. Correct answer is option 4, Samuel Johnson, also known as Dr. Samuel Johnson, Dr. Johnson. Okay, who is, remember the birth year here, country belonged to England. He was a critic, lexicographer, essayist, and poet. His major works are Dictionary of the English Language, 1755, Lives of the Poets, where he has mentioned 52 poets, 1779 to 81, and Essays in the Rambler and the Idler. Okay. So, as per the quoted remark appears in Samuel Johnson's critical writings, especially in Lives of the Poets. You will find the quotation given here. Johnson here expresses a skepticism about blank verse, particularly its lack of musical rhythm compared to rhyme poetry. Who is the master of blank verse and who popularized the term blank verse? Do quickly comment your answer. Okay, so this statement is quoted by Dr. Samuel Johnson. Johnson believed that poetry should have metrical harmony and rhyme. That is why he criticized blank verse as lacking the ease of prose, lacking the musical, that is numbers, rhythmic measure of traditional verses, and that is why he calls it verse only to the eye. Okay. All the remaining options, that is John Dryden, related to the period Restoration, father of English criticism, and the important work An Essay of Dramatic Poesy, 1668, preface to Fables, Ancient and Modern, 1700. He did not view and criticized on blank verse, but his view was different from the Dr. Johnson. Dryden supported blank verse, especially in drama. He defeated Milton's blank verse in Paradise Lost, and he saw blank verse as suitable for serious and elevated subjects. So this type of question you must practice now. And Dryden here never dismissed blank verse as verse only to the eye. So verse only to the eye, if this line you will find it, must go to Dr. Johnson. Okay. Alexander Pope also belongs to the neoclassical Augustan age. An essay on criticism, 1711, and the Dunciad, 1720, and the Rape of the Lock. These are the important works by him, 1712. Pope preferred heroic couplets and strict poetic form. So heroic couplet, he is very important. He emphasized order, harmony, and rhyme. His quotation on blank verse, Pope criticized poor versification in general but never used this formulation. Okay, so that is why you can say it is totally related to Dr. Johnson. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, from the Romantic Age, an important work, Biographia Literaria, lectures on Shakespeare, and remember, fantasy and imagination related with him. Coleridge strongly supported blank verse too. And he admired Shakespeare, Milton, and he saw blank verse as organic, flexible, and expressive. So verse is only for the eye is only related with Dr. Johnson. So Coleridge would never dismiss blank verse as mechanically deficient. Okay, so these are the correct answer. In one question, I will try to bring all the important highlights related to all the writers. Okay, so do stick to the channel and subscribe and share. Next question we have, poetry according to Sir Philip Sidney is of three kinds, and they are three kinds of poetry you have to find out as per Sir Philip Sidney's opinion. Religious, dramatic, romantic, classical, romantic, neoclassical, philosophical, imaginative, and narrative. Religious, philosophical, and imaginative. Correct answer. Correct answer as per Sir Philip Sidney, religious, philosophical, and imaginative. So option 4 is the correct answer. Religious, philosophical, and imaginative. The three kinds of poetry as per Sir Philip Sidney. You must remember from the Elizabethan age, who was a poet, courtier, soldier, and literary critic. And very important work, An Apology for Poetry, also known as the Defense of Poesy. 1579 it was written, and it was published 1595 posthumously. Okay, this text, An Apology for Poetry, is considered the first major work of English literary criticism. Remember, it is by Sir Philip Sidney, and here Sidney's classification of poetry as per him. In An Apology for Poetry, Sidney classifies poetry into three kinds, based on the, remember, based on the function and source, not on historical periods or genres. Okay, 1 second. Based on half. So what are those? Religious poetry. Religious poetry that is inspired by divine truth, biblical poetry, and purpose. That should be moral and spiritual instruction. Philosophical poetry deals with moral and ethical teaching, concerned with wisdom, virtue, and conduct, closely linked with classical philosophy. Okay, and imaginative poetry, as per him, created by the poet's creative faculty, includes heroic, lyric, pastoral, and dramatic poetry. And this is the, you can say, imaginative poetry, the three kinds of highest form of poetry according to Sidney. Okay, so that is how option 4 is the correct answer. Remember, religious, philosophical, and poetry, and among all these three, imaginative poetry is the highest one, because here you will find the creativity by the poet. Okay, next question we have, You can also get along this. Sydney does not use any dramatic or romantic as categorical divisions. Romantic is an anachronistic term emerging much later in the late 18th century. Sydney never classified poetry according to literary ages, and neoclassical belongs to the 17th, 18th centuries, long after Sir Philip Sidney. Okay. So I hope everything is clear. Now let's see the last question. 10 questions we will do, and we have 100 or 90 questions. So within 9 days, we will finish one set of the PYQs, and then we will start the next. And in between, during while solving the PYQs, we'll study about the writers separately with the important concept. We will start. I have shared you the 5 years most repeated writers. 5 years most repeated writers. So I will bring those writers classes. Now, question number 60, you have in anxiety of influence, which of the following definitions is given by Harold Bloom to explain the term clinamen? Poetic hyperbole, poetic misprision, poetic sublime, and poetic supplement. Anxiety of Influence is the only important work by Harold Bloom, so you have to read in depth about this work. Correct answer is option 2, poetic misprision. Okay. Poetic misprision belongs to United States of America. Remember the birth date 1930 to solve the matching and chronology questions. They give the writers. The important work, The Anxiety of Influence, a theory of poetry, published in 1973, must remember. So let's know first that what is actually Clinamen. Clinamen is the first of Bloom's 6 revisionary ratios. And the term here, it is borrowed from the Lucretius, that is from the Latin philosophy. And Clina means literally means a swerve. Okay. So clinamen in a poetic definition, you will find that misreading, that is misprision of a precursor poet, and a younger poet deliberately misinterprets or corrects the earlier poet to create originality. Poetic misprision is the exact definition here of the word clinamen. That is the part of Bloom's 6 revision ratios. Remember all the highlighted words related to one term. So here are the Bloom's 6 revisionary ratios. Clinamen, that is poetic misprision. Tessera, completion and antithesis. Kenosis, self-emptying. Demonization, counter sublime power. Ascesis, purification or self-limitation, and apophrates, that is return of the dead poets. So remember, you can take a screenshot. Now, hyperbole means, we all know that it means exaggeration. So Bloom never Clinamen as exaggerated, and this term is rhetorical, not theoretical in Bloom's system. Then we have poetic sublime. Poetic sublime is related with Longinus and Kant. In Bloom's theory, the sublime appears under demonization, not clinamen. Okay, and supplement is associated with Jacques Derrida, and it belongs to deconstruction, not Bloom's influence theory. So all the options clear. See the next question we have, question number 61 is, who among the following is known to have popularized the term globalization? They will ask you the question that who has coined the term, who has popularized the term. So there is the differentiation. You will have to be very careful while reading and answering the question. So here you just have to answer that who among all these writers, Ronald Robertson, Francis Fukuyama, John Urey, and John Tomlinson, popularized the term globalization, not coined but popularized. Okay. So options you have seen, and correct answer we have option 1, that is Ronald Robertson. Ronald Robertson belongs to the UK, British sociologist. Okay, concept with he has popularized globalization. It is actually combines and made from global plus local. That's this is done. Global plus local, it becomes globalization, popularized by Ronald Robertson. Okay, remember. This globalization term explains how global process adapt to local cultures rather than destroying them. So this is it's like a NTA, bring questions whether it's lesser, minor, but somehow they are associated with literature in forms of culture, in forms of criticism, in forms of any other way. They just put anything. So it's a global process. Remember, globalization is a global process that adopts local culture. So that is how it become globalization. Okay. Globalization does not here create any uniformity, so instead it produces localized versions of global phenomena, and that's how it becomes globalization. Remember, example, it is given here, McDonald's offering local menus, McAloo, that is tikki we know as in India, and global English adapting the local context. Hinglish we know and we speak in India, okay? So this is what. So globalization, it is a social theory and global culture work. You will find this term that is actually is the most cited work for globalization by Ronald Robertson. Remember, Robertson is considered the theorist who popularized and systemized the term globalization in academic discourse. That's why we all know and we are studying about this term. Now, Francis Fukuyama, who is he? He belongs to USA and known for The End of History and The Last Man, 1992. Remember the work? He is best known for his End of History thesis, which argues that the spread of liberal democracy and free market capitalism represents the final form of human government. Okay, he majorly focused on liberal democracy, political philosophy, and that's how we can eliminate this writer when NTA will ask that related with globalization, because he is not associated with this term. John Urey, who is from UK and known for the work The Tourist Gaze 1990 and Mobility Studies. He has discussed globalization, but somehow he is not popularized the globalization. He is associated, but NT is simply asking the question popularization of the globalization. So he is not associated. John Tomlinson from UK, United Kingdom, known for the work Cultural Imperialism 1991. Remember the work because many of the work we find in the matching questions with the year, so it somehow becomes tricky. Globalization and Culture is also 1990 work. It focuses on concepts like cultural globalization, deterritorialization, it's lengthy, and critics of cultural imperialism, but he did not popularize the term. Again, it's a globalization. So remember, the term globalization is popularized by Ronald Robertson. Okay, the work you have found out, and it becomes global plus localization. Okay, so this is how this term is popularized. Let's see the next question we have. Who among the following point the dictum, the medium is the message? Remember, each questions and associated concept clarification is very, very important. Who among the following coined the dictum, the medium is the message? The medium is the message. Raymond Williams, Erving Goffman, Marshall McLuhan, and John Fiske. We'll have to study about this writer because it was part of December 2025. And do not miss the video that I have uploaded, in which I have mentioned all the most important 5 year, not most important, but repeated writers. Okay. So correct answer, the medium is the message, coined by option 3, Marshall McLuhan. Okay, remember, very important, from Canada. He is from the Canadian origin, and he is associated with the field media studies, communication theory, and cultural studies. Marshall McLuhan, very important. Remember, cool and hot media. The medium is the message given by him. So McLuhan argues that the form of a medium, not its content, shapes human perception, society, and culture. And the medium itself influences how we think, feel, and interact. So this is his perception. Example you can take here. Print culture, that is the linear thinking, television, we study in paper 1 also about Marshall McLuhan, hot media and cool media. Visual passive engagement, digital media, fragmented, interactive, and consciousness. Remember the work, the Gutenberg Galaxy 1962, Understanding Media, the Extension of Man 1964. This is what source of the dictum, the medium of the message we found. Okay. You can remember that whenever you find and see the question related to medium is the message, global village, or media as extension of man, that all these concepts related with Marshall McLuhan. Okay, remember. Now let's see the next question. Other options we know, Raymond Williams belong to United Kingdom, very important figure of cultural theorist, cultural materialism, Marxist cultural theory, and the important work he has given us, Cultural and Society 1958, The Long Revolution 1961, Keywords 1976. You know, by this way you are going to memorize the work itself with the particular publication year or the written year and all the each of the writers that are the part of this one question that been given in the options. So that's why took so much time and thought this way that you start your preparation. But obviously the beginner you must start with the very basic. William criticized McLuhan, argued that how and why, do know this, media should be studied in relation to social and material conditions, but not in a technological determinism. Okay. So Raymond William is the not one who coined the medium is the message. Irving Goffman related with the sociology and interaction theory. Remember the key works he has given: The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, 1956, and Frame Analysis, 1974. And remember dramaturgical model, that in which he has mentioned about the front stage, back stage, that is, we know dramaturgy and self is related with Erving Goffman. Okay. And somehow he is not associated with the medium is the message. John Fiske related with United Kingdom, and he is associated with the field cultural studies, semiotics, and media studies. He has given the work Introduction to Communication Studies, 1982, and Television Culture, 1987. We have to study about this work, which is very, very important, and we get a lot of questions from this. And also this work we find in matching questions too with the writer. So Fiske is associated and applied semiotics, audience reception theory, and TV culture. Okay, you must remember. And that's how he did not coin the medium is the message phrase. Next question we have: who among the following presented the concept of multi-accentuality, remember, of the sign, saying that the sign possesses an inner dialectical quality and an evaluative accent? Who among the following? Roland Barthes, Stuart Hall, Jacques Derrida, and Valentin Voloshinov. Concept of multi-accentuality of the sign, in which they say that sign possess an inner dialectic quality. So it is associated with option 4, Valentin Wollstonecraft. He presented this concept in 1929 work Marxism and the Philosophy of Language. Remember the work Marxism and Philosophy of Language. This is the writer. He argued that multi-accentuality is a single sign which does not have one fixed static meaning. Instead, its meaning is dynamic and can be interpreted differently by various social groups. Remember, in which social structuralism, we find that meaning is fixed. But in post-structuralism, the concept we got deconstruction, difference, deferred. That means they said that no meaning is deferred. And here is the same thing he is talking about, that meaning can be interpreted differently by various social groups. So this is the meaning and his argument. On the basis of inner dialectical quality, that means signs are an arena of continuous class struggle because different social interests intersect in the sign, and it becomes a site of ideological tension and negotiation. So here they simply continuous class struggle. In a different class, in a different caste, in a different religion, there the word has a different meaning. You can take the simple example, the color. The black color that shows different sign in one religion, and in another religion you are going to find the different meaning of the same black color. So this is what the continuous class struggle, caste, religion, they are talking about. That is various, because of the various social groups, meaning can be interpreted different way. Okay. Evaluative accent, that means every use of a sign carries the specific attitudes and ideologies of the speaker, while the ruling class tries to make signs uni-accentual, that means fixed. Social unrest reveals their multi-accentual nature. Okay, now you got the point. So it is Valentin Voloshinov, in which work, 1929 work Marxism and Philosophy, he has talked about multi-accentuality, that means related with the nature, and inner dialectical quality, that means meaning is interpreted based on various social groups. He belongs to the Russia, that is the Soviet Union, and associated circle member of the Bakhtin circle, Mikhail Bakhtin. Okay. The field that he is associated with Marxist linguistic, philosophy of language and semiotics. And remember the work Marxism and Philosophy of Language 1929, and major concept associated with this writer you will find multi-accentuality of the sign, evaluative accent, inner dialectical quality of signs, ideological nature of language, language as a site of social struggle, sign as a social contested, and a class struggle within language. Okay. You can take the PDF for revision. So simply you can say that Voloshino argues that a sign does not have a fixed meaning. Every sign is multi-accentual, meaning it can carry different meanings depending on social class, ideology and historical context, and meaning is shaped by social evaluation, not by abstract linguistic structure alone. Okay. So here you can say he is also related with post-structuralism and somehow rejecting the structuralism. That means meaning is fixed. So whenever you find the multi-accentuality, evaluative accent sign as ideological or dialectics of meaning, the answer will be Wallenstein. Other writers we all know, Roland Barthes related with the field structuralism, post-structuralism, semiotics and literary theory. Country he belongs to France, remember. Mythologies 1957, Elements of Semiology 1964, The Death of the Author 1967 and SZ 1970. These are the important works by Roland Barthes. And the key concept that he has given us, myth as a second order semiological system, denotation and connotation, writerly versus readerly text, death of the author and pleasure of the text. Okay. Remember, in one question we will find a lot of such questions. So that's why this is going to be very helpful. Do not miss any questions and any concept. Stuart Hall, we all know he is associated with the country United Kingdom, Jamaica, and the field he is related cultural studies and media theory. Encoding Decoding 1973, Representations 1997, and key concept that he is associated with encoding decoding model. Preferred negotiated oppositional readings, representation and ideology, cultural identity and diaspora, hegemony influenced by Antonio Gramsci. Remember, Hall here focuses on media reception and audience interpretation, not on the internal dialects of linguistic science. Jacques Derrida, we all know, just I told you, deconstruction difference, meaning a concept is given by Jacques Derrida from post-structuralism. Remember, country he belongs to France, of grammatology 1967, writing and difference 1967, dissemination 1972. And concept you must remember, all the concept has appeared in the exam that in the previous year. So deconstruction, difference, trace, logocentrism, trace appeared in June 2025 too. Binary opposition is also very important. Instability of meaning is also one of the important concepts by Jacques Derrida. Okay, everyone. So whether the writer is going to repeat, I will definitely repeat everything about the writer for the practice. I hope every point is clear, and do let me know in the comment section, and you can also add anything if I have missed in this classes, that this writer is also related with many other concepts. Next question we have, on December 11, 1823. Ram Mohan Roy addressed a letter to the British authority which pleaded for modern Western education and is considered historically. So Indian aesthetic class is going to be, okay, separate class we will have Indian aesthetic. Then English in India, how it started and who were the members associated with English in India, that is also very important. Cultural theory, literary criticism and literary critics and linguistic part. This should be your major focus, not only the literatures, writers, work, drama. Okay. So on December 11, options you can see here. And the question is still, let me read the question. Modern education, Western education is considered historically important for the introduction of English education in India, who was the letter addressed to. So here simply the letter was written on December 11, 1823, Ram Mohan Roy addressed to British authority, in which he pleaded for modern Western education and considered historically important for the introduction of English education in India. So here, who was the letter addressed to? You have to find out which of the British authority the letter was addressed to, written. It was option Lord Amherst, Lord Minto, Lord Macaulay or Lord Bentinck. Okay, so correct answer we have Lord Amherst. Ram Mohan Roy from India, who is also known as father of Indian Renaissance, he wrote the letter on 11 December 1823, and the one that who became the recipient of the letter, who the letter was addressed to, was Lord Amherst. That means the Governor General of India from 1823 to 1828. So here Raja Ram Mohan Roy opposed the British plan to fund Oriental learning alone. Oriental learning alone, in which they included Sanskrit and Persian. So he argued strongly for Western sciences, modern philosophy, and English education. In the letter, he was mentioning. He believed traditional education promoted outdated metaphysics and superstition, and this letter is why considered a foundational document in the history of English education. So he is the correct answer. Okay. So Lord Ames was the Governor General at the time the letter was written, and the letter directly influenced later educational reforms, even though English education was formally implemented later. So this was the correct answer. Full name is William Pitt Amherst, Governor General of India, 23 to 28. He was the recipient of the letter written by Ram Mohan Roy, and in which he was majorly talking about to replace Oriental education with modern Western knowledge. Another option we have Lord Minto. Lord Minto was also Governor General of India. Date you can remember 1807 to 1813. Lord Minto's tenure ended a decade earlier. He had no connection with the 1823 letter. Remember the exact year mentioned. Lord Macaulay, who was also very important for Minute on Indian Education, 1835 Minute 1835 Minute Macaulay, we know him. Macaulay was not Governor General. He came to India after the 1823 letter, and his Minute implemented English education, but he was influenced by ideas already proposed by Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Ram Mohan Roy, sorry. Lord Bentinck was the Governor General of India 1828 to 35. He supported English education and implemented reforms. However, he became Governor General after the letter was written, which is 1823. So you must remember the exact year. Okay. Let's see the next question. Next question we have, which British administrator sought to make everything as English as possible in country which resembles England in nothing, as recorded by Sir Thomas Munro? Which British administrator sought to make everything as English as possible? If there will be need, I will add more detailed explanation, each including each point, concept, work. So I want your suggestions if this is okay or we should go more deeper. See the options: Lord Bentinck, Lord Hastings, Lord Cornwallis, and Lord Wellesley. Correct answer, which British administrator? It is option 3, Lord Cornwallis is the correct answer. Okay. From England, and also a Governor General of India from 1786 to 93. So to make everything as English as possible in a country which resembles England in nothing is attributed by Sir Thomas Munro to Lord Cornwallis. Remember, Sir Thomas Munro was a strong critic of excessive Anglicization. He opposed the Cornwallis system, which attempted to remodel Indian administration strictly on English lines. Munro here preferred governance adapted to Indian conditions, whereas Cornwallis believed in English laws, English courts, and English administrative value. So here it is Sir Thomas Munro to Lord Cornwallis is the correct answer. Now, policies by Lord Cornwallis supporting this view was introduced the Cornwallis Code in 1793, in which he mentioned English-style judicial system and separation of judiciary and executive. Recognized civil service on British models, excluded Indian from higher administrative posts. Remember this pointer they include in the question, and then they ask about the person, member, that is associated member. They emphasized British legal and moral superiority, and these measures reflect an attempt to replicate England's administrative structure in India, exactly what Munro criticized. Other options we have Lord William Bentinck from England, who was also a Governor General of India 1828 to 35, just after Amherst. Okay. Central figure in English education policy in India, implemented Macaulay's Minute on Education 1835, promoted Western education and English language, abolished Sati 1829, and introduced social and administrative reformations. Okay, so you must remember. He was, though closely linked with the spread of English education. Quoted remark by Sir Thomas Munro is not associated with Lord Bantic. Now, Lord Hastings, who was also from England and Governor General of India from 1813 to 23. That means he was before. He was before. Okay, remember. Known for territorial expansion of British India, led wars against Marathas and Pindaris, strengthened British political control, and associated with education or cultural Anglicization. He was less associated. Remember, his policies focused on military, political dominance, not cultural transformation on English lines. Lord Wellesley we have, who was also, he was from Ireland, British Empire, Governor General of India from 1798 to 1805. Founder of Fort William College 1800, advocated training British officials in Indian language and promoted subsidiary alliance system. And he also supported English education indirectly but valued Oriental learning for administrations. Somehow he is associated. So these are the highlights. You must Cornwallis English administrative system imposed, Bentinck English education and social reform, Hastings military expansion, and Wellesley administrative training and imperial strategy. So these are the important facts about English in India and the members who are associated, journals who are associated with their reforms. Next question we have, who among the following was the first director of the Central Institute of English and Foreign Language, Hyderabad? Now it is known as EFL University. English and Foreign Language. Option: Professor V.K. Gokak, Professor C.D. Narasimha, Professor C.J. Daswani, and Professor K.R.S. Iyengar. The first Director General, Central Institute of English and Foreign Language, you have to find out of all these members. Correct answer is option 1. Professor V.K. Gokak is the first Director General of the Central Institute, EFL. So, the first director of the Central Institute English and Foreign Language, that is EFL, 1958, it was established in Hyderabad, founded by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who served as chairman of the first Language Commission of India, which is also known as Gokak Committee. Major advocated of English studies in post-independence India, and who also worked extensively on Indian English literature and bilingual education. Okay, so remember who it is, Professor V.K. Gokak, and remember with Gokak Committee, 1958, EFL, Hyderabad, and founded by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Important work by him, English in India, its present and future, 1964, studies in Indo-Anglian literature. He strongly associated with English language teaching policy and a key figure in institutionalizing English studies after independence. Now here we have C.D. Narasimha, whose full name is Chakravarti Dr. Narasimha. It's Narasimhaiya. From India, who is very renowned literary critic and educationist. Remember, he taught English literature at University of Mysore. He was a strong critic of colonial hangover in English studies. Narasimha, the first patron, who was the first patron of Asian origin of the Association of the Study of Australia in Asia. Remember, his criticism combines ethical humanism, national consciousness, and anti-colonial intellectual independence. Okay, he founded Dhwanne Lok Center for Indian Studies, a center for promoting studies on Indian culture and arts. Dhwanne Lok is also founded by the name in Indian aesthetic. I'm forgetting the name. Sorry, Anand Vardhana. So it is the Dhwanne Lok Center for Indian English Studies. You have to take full name. In 1979, he also served as the resident scholar of International Research Center in Bellagio, 1968, and as a consultant to East West Center in Hawaii for 2 terms. Okay, these are the important highlights you must remember. And there are the different type of work that he has written. So works you will find on work Jawaharlal Nehru, remember as it is, the discovery of India, which is a abridged version edited by Dr. Professor C.D. Narasimha, published in 1981. And it was publisher was Jawaharlal Nehru Memorial Fund. Remember everything, Jawaharlal Nehru. Next work, Jawaharlal Nehru, a study of his writings and speeches and the human idioms. Subtitle is 3 lectures on Jawaharlal Nehru. Then his work on Indian thought and national figures is The Writers Gandhi. Then works on Indian English literature is The Swan and the Eagle. Essays on Indian English literature, Raja Rao, very important. Critical study of the novelist and makers of Indian English literature. Then his work is also you will find on Australian literature, which is the title The Flowering of Australian Literature. And there is an autobiography too, that means an N for nobody. Autobiography of an English teacher. Publication year 1991, and it is a series New World Literature. Okay, remember. Then another member we have C.J. Daswani, who was a linguist and educationist too, associated with applied linguistic and English language teaching, played a role in ELT development in India. C.J. Daswani, major areas he is associated with second language acquisition SLA and teacher training. So you must remember he is known for ELT scholarship. Then we have KRS Iyengar. You can hear how lengthy the name is. Kodaganular Ramaswamy Srinivasa Iyengar. So he was the pioneer of Indian English literary criticism. Indian English literary criticism, it is KRS Iyengar, pioneer, professor at University of Mysore, where Dr. Professor Narasimha was teaching. Professor, he was the professor, one of the earliest systematic critics of Indian English writing. Okay. Major works you must remember: Indian writing in English 1962, the Indian contribution to English literature, and he was the foundational critic of Indian English literature. Okay, so these are the pointers about all these members. Take the question number 67, and the question is: remember, you have to practice linguistic part a lot. There you have found more than 8-9 questions. And in June, while solving the PYQs, the questions, I told you that while analyzing, you got a lot of questions from linguistic part. So you must not forget to prepare. Which one of the following best explains the term paralanguage? Linguistic terms, device, techniques, you must prepare. The ways in which people mask what they mean by the words they use. The ways in which people show, here, remember, mask, show what they mean other than by the words they use. Option 3, the ways in which words carry meanings unintended by the speaker. And fourth, the ways in which the silence underlying speech communicates wrong meanings. You have to find out that which of these 4 options best explains the term paralanguage. Okay. So options we have, correct option was option 2, the ways in which people show what they mean other than by the words they use. It simply, paralanguage refers to all the non-verbal elements that accompany spoken language and help convey meaning apart from the actual words spoken. Not just we speak, but while speaking, we include a lot of other elements to enhance, you can say, our spoken. For example, here, tone of voice, pitch. In our speaking, all these elements include tone of voice, pitch, volume, intonation, stress, pauses, speed of speech. So all these includes in a paralanguage. Okay, so this is what you must remember, that what makes the spoken actually a and important and understandable for the listeners. So here you must remember, while language conveys meaning through lexical and grammatical structures, you all have studied the syntax. Paralanguage conveys meaning through how something is said. Remember how something is said, in which way, and what is said. So paralanguage is studied under paralinguistics, which is a branch of linguistics related to communication theory. Okay, how you communicate, how you interpret our thoughts in front of the listener. while including all the elements. So it is a way of communication. It is how we say something to others, how our communication become effective. So it is often discussed alongside kinesics, that is the body language, and proxemics, that is use of a space. Okay, remember. Here the examples you can take: the same sentence is spoken angrily, politely, or sarcastically that communicates different meanings due to paralanguage. Okay, same sentence you are going to speak in anger mode, and the same sentence the other person will speak so politely and sarcastically. So this is the way here you are using paralanguage. That means the meaning will be conveyed differently to the listeners. So a rising intonation may indicate a question even if the sentence structure is declarative. Okay, other options you have that is incorrect, relates more deception, pragmatic, masking, not paralanguage. So here we do not have to focus, but only the paralanguage, that option 2 includes. Okay. See the next question. Which two of the following oppositions are best evoked by Hamlet's utterance to be or not to be? That is the question. Hamlet by Shakespeare, which is a very important and most important, greatest tragedy in English literature, our beloved Shakespeare. So you have to find out that to be or not to be, it is a very popular soliloquy uttered by Hamlet, the character himself. Okay, so what does it signify? Two best options you have to find out. Two of the following oppositions. Oppositions you have to find out: between life and death, between action and emotion, between affirmation and confirmation, between doing and abstaining from doing. And here are the options you can find out. Remember, this is a very popular soliloquy. So option A and D is the correct answer. That means here he was in dilemma and talks and thought about the life, between life and death, and also between doing and abstaining from doing. Okay. So Hamlet's soliloquy to be or not to be occurs in Hamlet in Act 3rd, Scene 1st, and represents one of the most profound philosophical meditations in English literature. And the utterances explores two central oppositions. It's a contradictory, okay, between life and death. Oppositions they are to each other. This is the primarily philosophical tensions of the soliloquy, that he was in dilemma whether he should kill, take revenge from his uncle who became the reason of his father. Okay, and to be, which signifies existence, life, conscious suffering, while not to be, that signifies death, non-existence, or escape from worldly pain. Hamlet here weighs moral, spiritual, and existential implications that continue to live versus and ending life. So he was totally in confused situation that what he should actually do. And between doing and abstaining from doing, this is the opposition. The soliloquy also here dramatizes Hamlet's characteristic inaction. To be implies acting, enduring, engaging with life's struggle, while not to be implies withdrawal, refusal to act, or passive surrender. So to be, that means whether he should take the action to kill his uncle for his father's death, being the responsible for his father's death, and not to be, that means he should withdraw the revenge, he should refuse, and he should surrender. Okay, so this is what the opposition to be or not to be means here. The soliloquy here, rooted in Renaissance humanism and Christian morality, and is one of the most important you will find in the Elizabethan age. The drama, the soliloquy was very important, particularly the fear of the afterlife and divine judgment. Critics such as A.C. Bradley view this speech as an expression of Hamlet's moral sensitivity rather than cowardice. Okay. Now, the conflict between thought and action is central to Hamlet's tragic character, to be or not to be. So, you can say that it is not merely about suicide, but it is about the existence, moral responsibility, and fear of the unknown. Okay, that actually Hamlet holds. Next question we have: who among the following linguists proposed the term competence and performance? Like sign and signifier, lang and parole, competence and performance are also very important, and it is by, we all know, option 4, competence and performance, in Noam Chomsky. Okay, who was who belongs to United States. Remember the year and the field that he was actually associated with, linguistic and cognitive science. And remember the important work, Aspects of the Theory of Syntax in 1965. So Noam Chomsky introduced the distinction in Aspects of the Theory of Syntax 1965 and introduced the distinction between competence and performance. Also remember, competence and performance sometime it is also compared with Lang and Parole by Ferdinand de Saussure. Okay, Lang and Parole. So here the competence means the ideal internalized knowledge of a language possessed by a native speaker, like you can say grammar rules and structures. You can have the differentiation of American English and British one. And performance, the actual use of language, that what parole means, the speech by individual person, use of language in real situations which may be affected by memory limits, distractions or errors. Okay. Noah Webster is incorrect. He was a lexicography. He is known for lexicography and the famous work you must remember, An American Dictionary of the English Language, 1828. And he was a lexicographer. He was not related to any theoretical linguist. He majorly focused on a standardized American English spelling, remember, dictionary compilation, and also you can say did not contribute to any linguistic theory or concepts like competence and performance. Next one we have Steven Pinker, another option from Canada and United States, and the field he was associated with psycholinguistic cognitive science. The famous work, The Language Instincts in 1994. Okay, so Steven Pinker popularized linguistic ideas, many of them derived from, you can say, Chomsky, but he was, you can say, language. He talked about innate faculty, and you that's why he was not associated with competence and performance concept, or he did not coin, but he was an interpreter and a popularizer. He derived. Next, Roman Jacobson we have from Russia, and the field he was associated with structural linguistics and semiotics. Key contributions he has given us function of language. He majorly worked on phonology and Russian formalism. Remember, so Jacobson worked with structuralism, not any generative grammar, and his focus on communication models, poetic function of language, and he never proposed the competence and performance distinction. So all the options is clear here. Correct answer would be Noam Chomsky. Next question we have, which one of these statements define the scope of semiotics? You have to follow phonology, semiotic, pragmatics, paralanguage. All these are very important. I will share the notes of the linguistic. Previous class note is already there. See the options. Semiotics studies the sound system of language. Semiotics is a study of science system. Semiotic studies human science system only, and semiotic is a study of non-human science systems only. You have to find out one of these statements define the scope of a semiotics. Okay, so correct option would be semiotic is a study of a system. Okay, sound system of a language, that is the phonology, not semiotic. So semiotic is the study of a sign system. Semiotic is the systematic study of science and science systems. It is a study of science and science systems, including how science function, produce meaning, and communicate ideas. We have seen a lot of sign on the roads, and we just follow the sign, and we understand that what it actually signifies, what it actually means, and how it functions. Okay, so in linguistics, this is what it is, a semiotics. That means the sign, it studies a sign and its a system, how it actually functions in language. It includes linguistic science, that is language, and non-linguistic science, that you can find image, symbols, gestures, and cultural codes. Okay. Remember the members who were associated with Ferdinand de Saussure from Switzerland, language as a system of sign, mentioned in the work Course in General Linguistics 1960, and Charles Sanders Peirce from USA, who also conceptualized triadic model of sign, mentioning icon, index, and symbol. Other options you remember, semiotic studies, it is the sound system of language. This way phonetic and phonology, not semiotic. So this was the wrong. Semiotic studies human science system only. Semiotic studies both human and non-human science system. So this was also wrong. Okay. And semiotics is a study of non-human science. Semiotics includes human language, literature, culture, media, and symbols. So that's why all the options became wrong. Only option 2 is the correct one. Now let's see the next question, everyone. Next question we have, which according to Thomas Hobbes is the only science God has bestowed on mankind that informs the structure of his monumental work, Leviathan: astronomy, architecture, occult science, or geometry. Thomas Hobbes is the only science God has bestowed on. Correct answer, option 4, geometry. Okay, so Thomas Hobbes, who was an English political philosopher, believed that geometry is the only true and certain science because it proceeds through clear definitions, axioms, and logical deductions. So, option 4, that is how geometry is the correct answer. Now, here Hobbes' model Leviathan, which was published in 1651 on geometrical reasoning. He aimed to construct political philosophy with the same certainty as Euclid's geometry. Remember the reference? So, for Hobbes, happens. So for Fox, geometry represents rational order, precision, and scientific certainty, which he applied to human nature, society, and state. Okay, so you can simply remember the publication year, Leviathan, 1651. Hobbes belongs to 17th century, from political philosophy and early modern rationalism. Next, astronomy, we know it is not associated with, but here you can say Hobbes was skeptical of science dependent on observation rather than logical deduction. Architecture is also can't be the correct option. So architecture, it is a metaphorically involved structure. Here Hobbes explicitly privileges geometry over applied arts. Okay, and occult science is also incorrect. Now let's see the next question. Whenever I will find to need to add more clarification, I will definitely. You have seen the previous questions. See the next question. As mentioned in my first acquaintance with poets, it's a work which poet does William Hazlitt described as the only person I ever knew who answered the idea of a man of genius. Options: Coleridge, Wordsworth, Byron, and Shelley. In the work My First Acquaintance with Poets, which poet is mentioned by William Hazlitt? This is the work by William Hazlitt, and in this work, he has talked about, he described by mentioning this line, you have to find out that from which of these options he was talking about. So it is option 1, Coleridge. Okay, option 1, Coleridge. S.T. Coleridge, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. From Romantic Age, William Hazlitt's essay My First Acquaintance with Poets, which was published in the Liberal 1823, is a personal, reflective account of his early encounters with romantic poets. So in this work, in this essay, Hazlitt explicitly states the Samuel Taylor Coleridge was the only person I ever knew who answered to the idea of man of a genius. Hazlitt here admired Coleridge for intellectual range, philosophical depth, conversational brilliance, and imaginative power. Okay, remember all this. Coleridge appeared to Hazlitt as a living embodiment of romantic genius, combining poetry, metaphysics, theology, and criticism. So you can simply remember Hazlitt's essay, My First Acquaintance with Poets. So here he has mentioned Coleridge as a man of genius. Okay, so option 1, Coleridge was the correct answer. Coleridge is very important. Remember the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, 1798, which was published in the uh, Post Lyrical Ballad, 1798, by William Wordsworth and S.T. Coleridge himself. Biographia Literaria, 1817, is also very important. Kubla Khan, 1816, and the term concept here is associated with romantic imagination, organic unity, philosophical criticism, and fancy and imagination, where it is mentioned here. Wordsworth, we know about William Wordsworth from Romantic Age 2, was a major English romantic poet and co-author of Lyrical Ballad, 1798, in which both combinedly published their work. In Hazlitt's essay, 23 works published. Four, four were from S.T. Coleridge and 19 by William Wordsworth. Okay, the first work was The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and the last work was Tinton Abbey by William Wordsworth. So here Wordsworth is portrayed as quiet, reserved, deeply connected to nature and rural life. So he was basically mentioned the and focusing on the common language. Lyrical Ballad, 1798, Prelude, Tintin Abbey, The Excursion, Border are the important works by William Wordsworth. And the poetry he was majorly focused on poetry of common life and emotion recollected in tranquility. And poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling. This is the very famous quotation by him. Lord Byron was a leading romantic poet associated with rebellion, passion, and the Byronic hero, which is very important for exam. So Byron does not figure in Hazlitt's My First Acquaintance. Remember, Child, Harold's Pilgrimage, Don Juan are the important work, and Byronic hero, romantic individualism is the important concept. P.B. Shelley was also belongs to romantic age that represents the second generation of romantic poets. He is known for idealism, radical politics, and lyrical intensity. And the important work you must remember Prometheus Unbound, a defense of poetry, and concept poets as legislators of the world, and idealism. Okay, let's see the next question, everyone. And next question we have which one of the following essays holds that as a method, realism is a complete failure? Which one of the following essays? Virginia Woolf, The Mark on the Wall, Oscar Wilde, The Decay of Living, D.H. Lawrence, Why the Novel Matters, and Mary McCarthy, My Confession. As a method, you have to find out in which of these works by the writers mentioned here are you find this. As a method, realism is a complete failure. So this is the work Oscar Wilde, The Decay of Living. Oscar Wilde's critical essay, The Decay of Living 1889, is a foundational text of aestheticism. He was associated with aestheticism movement, aesthetic beauty he was talking about. Remember, in this essay, while Oscar Wilde argues proactively that art should not imitate life, life imitates art, and realism as a literary method is a fundamentally flawed. So here, as a method, realism is a complete failure. Directly here reflects Will's rejection of realism, okay, and his advocacy of artifice, imagination, and aesthetic beauty. Remember, he was associated with aestheticism and art for art's sake. Another option, Virginia Woolf's work, The Mark on the Wall, is incorrect. Virginia Woolf was a British modernist writer. The Mark on the Wall, 1917, is an experimental short essay that challenges material realism but does not reject realism outright. So this option was incorrect. Woolf here critiques Edwardian realism and promotes psychological realism. Remember the work A Room of One's One, Mrs. Dalloway, To the Lighthouse are the important works, and she has been associated with the stream of consciousness technique and modernism. D.H. Lawrence, Why the Novel Matters. This is also incorrect. He believed in the novel as living organic form. So in this essay you find, which was published in 1936, he criticized mechanical and moralistic readings of novels, but does not call realism a failure. Lawrence values felt life, not aesthetic distance. So concept vitalism and organic wholeness is concept associated with D.H. Lawrence. Okay. Another option, Mary McCarthy, the work My Confession. Mary McCarthy was an American novelist and critic, and My Confession is an autobiographical and personal essay with no theoretical attack on realism as a literary method. So remember the genre that Mary McCarthy was associated with autobiographical essay and personal criticism. Okay. So hence you can say that option 1 was the correct answer of the question. Option 2, Oscar Wilde. Okay. The Decay of Living. Remember the work associated with the writer. I have tried to add concept and why the work is not associated. That is also mentioned here. Now let's see the next question we have is 74 question. Okay. And the question is here, which of the following novels is structured into a poem of 999 lines preceded by a foreword followed by a commentary and an index? 999, 999 preceded by a foreword followed by a commentary and an index. You have to guess the novel that is structured such way into a poem of 999 lines. Ragtime, Pale Fire, The Inner Side of the Wind, and Hourglass. Correct answer of this question is option 2, Pale Fire. Okay, and this work, this novel is written by Vladimir Nabokov. Okay, writer from Russia, and the publication of Pale Fire is 1962. Remember the publication year also 1962. So the concept that is actually associated with this novel you must remember. Pale Fire is a classic post-modern meta-fictional novel. Okay, remember it consists of 999 lines written in heroic couplets by fictional poet John Shade. Remember, and a forward is a concept, and extensive commentary it is by Charles Kinboard, and index is also there, and the novel parodies scholarly annotation blurring the line between text and interpolation. So you have to remember the novel, that is the Pale Fire, written in 999 lines, and the writer is Vladimir Nabokov, that is from Russia. Okay, Russian born American writer, remember. Now other options why they were wrong. Another work, Ragtime. Ragtime, it is by E.L. Doctorow from United States, and this publication of this work is 1975. Okay, 1975. Remember, and the genre and the concept that is associated with this work is it is a historical metafiction blending real historical figures with fictional characters. And the structure line of this work is linear prose narrative. Not this is not a poem commentary format. So there is a clear word mentioned commentary format. So commentary format is a Pale Fire, okay, by Vladimir Nabokov from Russian-born American writer. 1962 is a publication year. Remember. The Inner Side of the Wind. This work is also incorrect. This is by Milorad Pavic from Serbia, Serbia-born writer. Okay. This work is in a lexicon style, and it is a postmodern novel, which is also known as Hero and Leander. Okay. You must remember it is not structured as a 999 line poem. Next, we have Hourglass, which is also incorrect, and it is also by the same writer, Milorad Pavic. 1977, this work was published, remember, and this work is an experimental novel that can be read in multiple directions. Now we got everything is clear about all the work. Remember the writer, because one after the other NTA repeats the writer. While analyzing the 5-year questions, now I found that in if they have repeated one writer in this year, that writer is repeated in the next, but they are missed. They have missed the same in after 1 to 3 cycle. So this is their pattern, and the same thing few of them writer you will find in all the cycles and in each year repeatedly, and that the thing I have mentioned in that video. I took so much time analyzing all the 5-year questions. Okay, and PDF is also available on the Telegram. You can join and get. Next question we have, which among the following novels includes a questionnaire for the reader, such as, do you like the story so far, yes or no? That means in this question you have to find out, here are the work that they have mentioned. These are the novels, okay? Novels, and in this novel, there is a questionnaire that is included. You have to find out in which of these novels the questionnaire included, such as, do you like the story so far, and many other questions, okay? So you have to find out that which is the correct one. The correct answer of this question is it's option 3, Snow White by Donald Barthelme. Snow White, okay? The publication year of Snow White is 1967. 1967, okay? Snow White. It is by Donald Barthelme. Why this is a there is a questionnaire. This landmark postmodern novel that revokes the fairy tale Snow White. You must remember Snow White 1967 is a celebrated work of metafiction that famously disrupts the traditional reading experience by interacting directly with the audience. And at the end of part 1, remember at the end of the part 1, here Barthelme inserts a formal questionnaire consisting of 15 questions aimed at the reader. How many questions? 15 questions. Okay, 15 questions that writer has aimed here. And here are the questions you must remember. If they have given one question, they might be going to give the many. So the first question in this list is, do you like the story so far? Yes or no? Then other question in the quiz include, has the work for you and a metaphysical dimension? And does the world of the story resemble the world you live in? These are the type of questions that you will find in Snow White 1967. Okay, there is a technique that used to draw the attention of artificiality of fiction and relationship between the author and the reader. So that is why you can say that the writer here has aimed by putting all the questions to attach or feel more connected with the reader by putting all these questions, by asking all these questions. Okay. Another work was Mantissa, which is by John Fowles from England. Publication date of this work is 1982. It is a metafictional novel, but about authorship, creativity, and the muse. So this work you can simply eliminate. While this work is reflexive and there is no questionnaire included. Another one you have Waterland. Waterland is by Graham Swift from England, and this work is published in 1983. 1983, okay? It is a historiographic metafiction that blends history, memory, and narrative. It is also, you can say, conventional narrative voice you will find here, and there is no questionnaire. So you can also eliminate this. Next one we have If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler. This is also incorrect. This is written by Italo Calvino from from Italy. The writer is Italian, and this work was published in 1979. This is written in a second person, and it is also a metafictional novel. Okay, and there is also, you can say, there is no questionnaire included. So the correct answer was Snow White. It is by Donald Barthelme, and publication is in 1967. Okay, remember the questions that are included here. I hope all the things is clear. Let's see the next question. So this is type of the question NT keep asking. Like we keep preparing about the major writers, but eventually we find such writers minor they include, and the work they find from where, that is also matter of like we have to discover. Let's see the next question. Question number 76 we have. What is the subject of Ivan's controversial essay in The Brothers Karamazov? This work I also find most repeated in all the questions, all the question paper. So you must not forget this work and this writer. And the options: transubstantiation, the evils of clergy, the Eucharist, and ecclesiastical codes. Okay, remember. You can watch the videos of the 5-year most repeated writers, concept, linguistic part. This time you cannot miss. Paper 1 class, I will start soon. Correct answer? It is option 4, Ecclesiastical Code. The novel is The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky, okay, from Russian writer. Russian writer. Publication of this work is 1880. Remember, 1880, and the genre of this novel is a philosophical novel based on psychological realism. Remember, okay, this is a religious fiction. So here the Ivan Karamazov's controversial essay argues that the church should absorb the state and crime should be judged by ecclesiastical, that means church, courts rather than secular courts. Okay, now you got the point. That means here simply the argument by the writer is that all the state, is church should be the responsible for the judgment, not any their secularism that is included and do the judgment, but ecclesiastical there should be the churches. Okay, this idea appears during discussion on church-state relations, morality, crime, and responsibility. Okay. Here the writer also argues that when society fully embraces Christianity, secular law will become unnecessary. Okay. Crime should be judged as a sin. Crime should be judged as a sin, not merely legal violation. That they have done something, they have violated something, but it should be judged like that the person has involved in a serious crime, and that should be watched like you have done sin. Church courts should rehabilitate spirituality and not just punish. Secular law becomes obsolete in true Christian society. And in the philosophical sense, he also argues that intersection of law, morality, theology, and free will, these should be in the philosophical judged by in a philosophical manner. Philosophical issue, this should be judged. So you can say this is a radical theological political argument, and the concept that are associated here that represents rationalism, skepticism, and moral philosophy. So here ecclesiastical court as moral spiritual courts replacing secular justice. So remember the word ecclesiastical, okay? This writer Ivan is also responsible for rebellion that you will find in the problem of evil, the grand inquisitor, that means freedom versus authority he has talked about. So here Dostoevsky presents Ivan's ideas without endorsing them. Okay. Remember the major works by Fyodor Dostoevsky, Poor Folk 1846, Notes from Underground 1864, Crime and Punishment. This work is very, very important. You have to study this work in depth. Okay. You got so many questions. The Idiot 1869, Demons the Possessed 1872, and the Brothers Karamazov 1880. Okay. Key theoretical associations the writer is actually associated with is existentialism, problem of evil, faith versus reason, free will versus authority, and church-state debate. Later thinkers that influenced by him, Albert Camus, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Nietzsche. Now another options was transubstantiation was incorrect. Why? Because this is related with Catholic doctrine. Catholic doctrine that bread and wine became the body and blood of Christ during the Eucharist. Remember the Roman Catholic theology that was supposed to be the Council of Trent in 16th century. And here you can see the writer does not sacramental theology in his essay. The evils of clergy is also incorrect. Why? Because here you will find the moral corruption or hypocrisy that is within the church. So this option you can easily eliminate. And the Eucharisty, this was also incorrect. Why? Because here Christian sacrament commemorating the Last Supper, but not what the first work was doing. So in this work you can also, this concept you can also eliminate. I hope everything is clear. Remember all the works. Work is important to solve the matching questions because now we can't even predict what they are going to do. So our preparation and strategy should be very much up to the mark. Next question we have, which one of the following Sherlock Holmes stories refers to a significant event in English history? Now, we all have studied about Sherlock Holmes, how important and which type of stories that is majorly involved in, like detective fiction, detective stories. So you have to find out that which stories that refers to significant event in English history. In English history, it is the Musgrave Ritual, the Speckled Band, the Solitary Cyclist, and the Red-Headed League. Which one of these options of are the following stories that refers a significant, that means you have to find out an important event that you will find in the work of Sherlock Holmes that became the part of English history. Okay, so correct answer is it's option 1, the Musgrave Ritual. This work is written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the Musgrave Ritual, from England, and publication, this was first published in 1893. Remember each highlighter, and now you all have to start your preparation. Don't wait that just before 1 month exam you are going to start your preparation. No, you start. Prepare your own strategy. Do the self study. Few things I keep recalling, keep telling you. Self-study, solving PYQs, MCQs with concept clarification or on the basis of your own analyzation is really important. So this is what you must do. The work published in 1893 and in the collection, The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, 1894. Okay. So this work, the Musgrave Ritual, directly refers to significant event in English history. Why? Because here you will find the execution of King Charles I, 1649, during the English Civil War. That's why this is important and became the important event in English history that is mentioned here. So in this story, you will find an ancient family ritual encodes directions to a hidden crown, and also the ritual dates back to 17th century. The hidden object is connected to the royal regalia, specifically associated with Charles I. So which King Charles I? Remember, Execution of King Charles I in this work, you will find that became the important event in the English history. Here also, Sherlock Holmes deciphers the ritual using historic and antiquarian knowledge, okay? And the historical context that is important. The English Civil War 1642 to 51, execution of King Charles I, and also conflict between monarchy and parliament. Because of this conflict, they die. Because of this conflict, the king, the emperor die, and that became the part of history. So in English history, you have to remember they because they belong to England. Arthur Conan Doyle, you remember 1859, he was born from the Scotland and a British writer. His field he majorly associated with physician. He was novelist and short story writer. And remember the works: A Study in Scarlet, 1887. Scarlet, there is an important work by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Tell me the publication date and the characters. The Sign of the Four, 1890, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, 1892, The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, 1894, this was the collection, okay. The Hound of the Baskervilles, 1902, and The Return of Sherlock Holmes, 1905. 1905, 1905. Concepts that Arthur Conan associated with detective fiction, rational empiricism, Victorian realism, and historical consciousness in popular fiction. Now I am like teaching like this while showing the face, so I'm my direction is changing. I don't know where I'm looking. So here you can must remember Holmes often uses logic, historical knowledge, and antiquarian references. All these are associated with Sherlock Holmes. Okay. Next, you remember the Speckled Band. The Speckled Band was incorrect, and this was published in the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes 1892, which was the collection. 1892. Okay. So here you will find the concept of locked room mystery. Remember in which work this is the Speckled Band. Speckled Band, locked room mystery, exotic crime involving an Indian swamp adder. This concept you will find in the Speckled Band published in 1892. Then another one you have the Solitary Cyclist, which was published in 1903, and in the collection The Return of Sherlock Holmes, 1905. 1905, okay. And the concept here: threatening courtship, identity fraud, and forced marriage. The last one, Red-Headed League, 1891, and The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, the collection, you will find this work 1892. 1892, okay. 1891, that means the real publication year, and the collection, there is a gap of 1 year. Remember, the concept in the red-headed league is absurd secret societies and bank robbery plot. Remember all the important concepts that are associated with, because never know what's mind of like NTA, what they are going to do. Remember all the works. Now question number 78 we have a Harold Skimpole is a character in. I told you in the 5 year most repeated writer that Charles Dickens writers are very, very important. In each cycle, all the 5 year questions, every year we have two cycles. So you can say like in 10 cycles, cannot miss Charles Dickens characters and his work. So there are few writers, you must easily prepare them. I told you, na, if we are not aware about any minor writer that Ed is going to bring in each paper, so why not solving all the major writers' question correctly by going and studying them deeper? Okay, this was the aim I told you during the class. So you have to find out that Harold Skimpole is a character in Bleak House, Dombey and Son, Great Expectations, and Oliver Twist. Remember, all the works is here mentioned by Charles Dickens. So correct answer is Bleak House. In Bleak House, you will find the character Harold Skimpole. Bleak House is a novel. Author is by Charles Dickens, and this work was published in 1852, serialized in 1853. Remember, Charles Dickens is one of the most important novelists from Victorian realism, Victorian era. And Harold Skimpole, let's analyze this character. Here he pretends to be childlike and innocent. He avoids responsibility for money and morality, and also he exploits others while claiming artistic purity. So here Dickens critique romantic irresponsibility and false aestheticism. Okay, remember, false aestheticism. By putting this character in the work Bleak House, simply Charles Dickens is trying to show that romantic irresponsibility by the people, like romanticism writers and people, were majorly focusing on the ordinary language, common people, nature, humanity. So here he is trying to convey, he is trying to show that a romantic irresponsibility, and there you will find falsity, fallacy, or aestheticism. So Harold Skimpole is a minor but memorable character in Charles Dickens' novel Bleak House. He represents irresponsible aestheticism, moral evasion, and selfish innocence. That means you are not working, but still you are trying to be innocent. Skimpole is often read as a satirical portrait of the romantic writer Leigh Hunt. This is very important. Skimpole is often read as a satirical portrait of the romantic writer Leigh Hunt. That means you can say he is here portrayed as a Leigh Hunt. Leigh Hunt's responsibility, maybe he was not like that, but still he has been satirized by this writer. Okay. Charles Dickens is very important from Victorian age, and remember all the important works: Oliver Twist 1837, Nicholas Nickleby 1838, Dombey and Son 1846, David Copperfield 1849, Bleak House 1852, The Tale, sorry, there should be Tale not Take, Tale of the Two Cities 1859, and Great Expectations 1860. Okay. Dombey and Son was incorrect. Why? Because it focuses on commerce, family pride, and emotional neglect. There is no character named Harold Skimpole, so this statement you can simply eliminate. And here the characters Paul Dombey and Florence Dombey you find. Great Expectations. Remember, this is a Bildungsroman. Bildungsroman. Pip Philip Pirip is the main character here, who stays, who live with his sister and his brother-in-law. Here you will find the character, major character Pip, Magwitch, Miss Havisham, and Estella. Estella is the love interest of Pip. And there you will find no Skimpole like aesthetic character. Oliver Twist. Oliver Twist here deals with crime, poverty, and child exploitation. So there you cannot find any innocency of false, irresponsible behavior by the character. Okay. Next question we have. I hope everything is clear. Next question we have, who is the author of a Fragment 1819, one of the earliest vampire stories in English? See, now we have to study all the type of stories, drama, novel, character, everything. Like we are just like our syllabus, the English literature that is not defined, but you have to study everything. Similarly, we have to keep everything in our mind that yes, this is our ability, we can do anything. This is what NTA think, and let's like make them feel them wrong that English literature students can do. Your answer, P.B. Shelley, Lord Byron, Bram Stoker, and Mary Shelley. Of Fragment 1819, one of the earliest vampire stories in English. So you have to find out who is the author. So author of these stories is Lord Byron, a romantic age writer, Lord Byron. Okay, from Romanticism, moment he belongs to. So a Fragment 1819 is an unfinished vampire tale written by Lord Byron. It is one of the earliest vampire narratives that you find in English literature. Like all the writers, we try to study all the major works, but somehow, even if we try, somehow their unfinished work remain unnoticed to us. Because the one who writes the book, the one who compile all the books, the writers, maybe they also missed. That's why we cannot reach. And even if we try to find on Google, Wikipedia, still, but NTA, where they find from. So their stories introduce the aristocratic, mysterious vampire figure later developed by the others. Remember, so A Fragment 1819, it is an unfinished work by Lord Byron from Romanticism, romantic writer. So you must remember A Fragment, the literary importance associated with this work. Here you will find the Byronic vampire that is actually an important character which is You can say very famous, popular, and associated with Byron. Byronic hero or Byronic. Dark aristocratic charm you find here, Gothic supernatural elements directly influenced John Polidori's The Vampire 1819. So remember the work that is influenced 1819, the same year. So Lord Byron associated with Romanticism. Remember the major works of Child, Harold's Pilgrimage, 1812, Manfred, 1817, Don Juan, 1819. This work is also unfinished, remember, and a fragment, 1890. Okay. P.B. Shelley, we know, belongs to Romanticism too. Prometheus Unbound 1820, Adonis 1821 did not write a fragment, so a fragment is an option. You can simply eliminate it. Bram Stoker from Ireland, Irish writer. Dracula 1897. This work was also there in matching question. Dracula. So remember the writer Bram Stoker. Okay, and 1897 is a publication year. Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, and The Last Man. The Last Man was also there. Mary Shelley, remember, okay? Associated with Gothic science fiction, not vampire fragment. Now let's see the next question. Lala Kanchi Ram is a character in. Now Lala Kanchi, we can imagine that Lala Kanchi we find in Indian literature. So we here the character Kanchi Ram, sorry, is a character in Arun Joshi's The Apprentice, Chaman Nahal's Azadi, Anita Desai's Fire on the Mountain, and Kamala Markandeya's A Handful of Rice. So correct answer of this question, Chaman Nahal's Azadi, 1975. In this work, you are going to find the character. Okay, remember. So here you find this work is actually a post-partition Indian English fiction. Remember, and the concept that is associated with this work: partition of India, 1947, trauma, displacement, migration, Hindu-Muslim conflict, and nationalism and Gandhian ideals. Hindu-Muslim conflict, the religion conflict in from our country is maybe never going to disappear if our ministers won't change their perspective. That's the saddest part. Even everyone is so educated now, still they fight in such thing for such thing. So key characters remember in this work: Lala Kanchiram, that is actually a part of the question, Arun, Sunanda, and Prabharani. See from where they find this work and character. Lala Kanchiram is a central character in Chaman Nahal's Azadi work in 1975. Okay, remember. This character actually represents the Hindu refugee experience during partition, especially the emotional and psychological suffering caused by forced migration from Sialkot to India. You remember the place because this is also place they asked in from which work this place is taken. Okay, that mentioned. And the novel is one of the most important partition novels in Indian English literature, which is Azadi. Remember the important work by Chaman Nahal, which is Azadi 1975, Into Another Dawn 1977, The Crown and the Lion Cloth 1981, and The Salt of Life 1990. Okay, so I hope it is clear now. Arun Joshi, The Apprentice is a work by Arun Joshi, 1974. It is also from post-independence Indian English fiction. This work is a concept that is associated with this work is existential crisis, moral corruption, bureaucracy, and individual responsibility. And also, you must remember that this work influence of existentialism. There you will find the writer Jean Paul Sartre, Albert Camus. Characters here you will find Ratan Rathor. That is the protagonist. Lala Kashiram does not appear in this work, so you can eliminate. Important work by Arun Joshi you have. Arun Joshi, The Foreigner 1968, The Strange Case of Billy Biswas 1978. This is also appear in the exam, The Apprentice 1974, and The Last Labyrinth 1981. All the works appear in the matching questions. Anita Desai is also important. Fire on the Mountain. Remember, there was a question, no? The lady that got fifth time pregnant. So that was the question from this work in December 2025. The question that actually picked. The question was from this work. Fire on the Mountain, 1977. Alienation, feminist consciousness, and psychological isolation of this work. You must remember concept that is associated with interior monologue too. And the characters you have Nanda Kaul, Raka, and Hila Das. This work deals with female subjectivity, psychological withdrawal set in Kasoli. Kasoli is the place, it has no connection with partition. Remember the work by Anita Desai, Cry the Peacock 1963, Voices in the City 1965, Fire on the Mountain 1977, and The Clear Light of the Day 1980, In Custody 1984. Then we have Kamla Markandeya. Markandeya is important character also, important writer also from Indian English literature. Okay, you must not forget. A Handful of Rice 1967. Remember the concept that associated with this work, urban poverty, class struggle, survival ethics, and Marxist undertones. And the character in this work, A Handful of Rice, you will find Ravi and Nalini. Nalini is already appeared in the previous year exam. This novel focuses on urban proletariat life in Madras, okay, and the struggle of survival. Remember the work Nectar in a Sieve 1954, Some Inner Fury 1955, A Handful Rise 1966, and The Nowhere Man 1972, and Two Virgins you will find here 1973. So all the works must not forget. Now here I have added few partition novels that you must remember. The first one is obviously Azadi by Chaman Nahal, which was published in 1975. A Train to Pakistan is also very important by Kushwant Singh 1956, and Cracking India, which is by Bapsi Sidhwa. Remember the character here, you will find Annie. So you in chronology, you must remember the first one will appear Train to Pakistan, then Azadi, and the last one Cracking India. Okay, which is Cracking India, also known as Ice Candy Man. Remember, okay, Cracking India is also known as Ice Candy Man. Okay, everyone. The time is it's already too much time. Okay, so thank you so much for watching, everybody. We have solved 80 questions and remaining we will meet in next class. Thank you so much for joining. Do take care of yourself and let's say bye bye for till next meet.